guys, Paul here, the Impulsive Culinarian, and in this video we're doing a reboot of my very first YouTube video ever, my gluten-free white bread recipe. So I can't believe over a year has gone by. In April of 2017 is when I posted my very first video on the Impulsive Culinarian channel on YouTube for my gluten-free, dairy-free white bread recipe. Now that's an old recipe. It's older than a year. It took almost, 5 or 6 years to develop that recipe. Lots of experimentation, lots of trials, and lots of failures. And kids are a great litmus test for that because they're honest. They are brutally honest. If they don't like something, they'll tell you. So it is my go-to fail-safe white bread recipe, and because it's the first one that I ever did, it's a little outdated. I think it's time for a reboot. The reason we're doing that, this is going to be sort of the inaugural episode of my monthly gluten-free bread recipes. We're going to be doing something fun, something new every month or so, and I thought, what a better recipe to use than my original white bread recipe to sort of kick that off. So guys, here are the ingredients that you're going to need. All right, so let's split this out into 3 groups. We're going to start with the yeast mixture, 3/4 of a cup of warm water. And by warm, I mean no more than 100 degrees Celsius, okay? 3 teaspoons of active dry yeast and 2 teaspoons of sugar. Now let's move on to the dry ingredients. You're going to need 1 1/3 of a cup of tapioca flour, 2/3 of a cup of potato starch, 2/3 of a cup of corn starch, not corn flour, corn starch, 2/3 of a cup of white rice flour, and 2/3 of a cup of sweet rice flour. 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of guar gum, and finish that off with a teaspoon of salt. Last but not least, the wet ingredients. 1 more cup of warm water, doesn't have to be exactly 100 degrees, but close. 1 organic egg, 1/3 of a cup of dairy-free margarine, and 2 tablespoons of organic honey. Let's get on this reboot for my gluten-free white bread, guys. So if there's one recipe that I have made more than any other in all of my arsenal of gluten-free, dairy-free stuff, this is the one, my gluten-free, dairy-free white bread recipe. And it's the one that kicked off the whole channel, this whole idea of Impulsive Culinarian, because I was incensed at the idea of paying, so much money, $8 sometimes, for this tiny loaf of little mini pieces of gluten-free bread. Now, listen, when you're stuck in a pinch, we've bought them. I mean, that's life. Sometimes you're just in a rush and you need a loaf of bread. But it was absolutely essential for me to develop a recipe that didn't taste like crap, that didn't have aftertaste, and that could be used in sandwiches, untoasted. I mean, that was the whole point. And so this fresh loaf of white bread was the result of many, many years of experimentation. I've made it so many times, I know it by heart, but let's get cracking. Here's the first thing that you want to do. We're going to start with the yeast ingredients. All right, so much like I did in the very first video, I'm sure that I talked about how lucky we are where we live to be able to drink the tap water. It is very good quality water, and so I just take my warm water right out of the tap. I know what temperature I can get away with. If you're not able to drink water from your tap, you basically want to boil off around a cup of water and put it aside in a separate bowl and let it cool until in an instant read of thermometer gives you that 100 degree mark. That's when it's good to go. Take 3/4 of a cup of that warm water and put it in a small mixing bowl. All right, so the whole concept of yeast, there's a few different types and it's easy to mix them up. So I'm just going to show you out here, this is the Fleischmann's active dry yeast. That's the one that we're doing, the traditional active dry yeast. They have, instant yeast. They have the one for the cake machines. There's a bunch of different types. This is the one that I use. It's absolutely perfect for this recipe, so I'm sure you'll be able to find it at a store near you. Get 3 teaspoons or 1 tablespoon of that yeast into the warm water. All right, next you want to get 2 teaspoons of sugar into that mixture and mix it around with a whisk so that everything is thoroughly combined and all of those little granules of yeast have dissolved into the water. All right, so once that sugar and the yeast granules have thoroughly dissolved, what we're doing is we're proofing the yeast, making sure that it's still alive. So you want to set that aside in a warm location and let it poof up. It's going to get a dome of foam on the top. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is get all of our dry ingredients into a large mixing bowl. That's the flours, the starches, the baking powder, guar gum, salt, all that. So we're going to get that in there and whisk it together with a great big whisk, just so that it's thoroughly combined and it acts like one consistent dry ingredient. Let's get them in. All right, so I want to just offer a little tip about measuring off these dry ingredients. And this comes from the experience of chatting with a lot of you over the past year from that very first video. measuring off dry ingredients in a large cup like this, like a large measuring cup with, you've got, okay, 1/3. It's not precise, okay? And that's the problem with gluten-free recipes, is especially with bread, you want to be precise. A little bit too much dry or not enough, it's gonna change the texture, it's gonna probably ruin the recipe. So instead of using a great big measuring cup rather, you want to use a level measuring cup like this that you can rely on having the exact amount, all right? So measure off precisely the dry ingredients and you will be happy in the end. All right, so let me just talk to you quickly about sweet white rice flour. This happens to be from Bob's Red Mill, okay? I'm not getting anything to tell you that. It's not an endorsement for money. It's just what I use. And the thing about this is that I've found from discussions with you guys over the past year, it's not always available. Some of you guys have a really hard time finding sweet white rice flour. Is it important? Can you just swap it out for a double amount of white rice flour? Yes, you can. Will it turn out the same? No, it won't. It'll taste okay, but this stuff, what's so special about it? It sort of sits on the fence between acting like a starch and a flour. It's a little bit gummier than a regular flour, but not quite as pasty as a starch. It is absolutely essential. It's one of the main ingredients in a lot of my gluten-free cooking. It's possible to order it online. If you can find it, that would be the best I would recommend for you, but hopefully you can sort of track it down in a local health food store, or even better, talk to the manager of your local health food store and say, I want some of this stuff. Paul the Impulsive Culinarian said I need to use it, okay? Try and find it, guys. Okay, big whisk, get all of that really combined so it acts like one ingredient. Okay, so the third and last bowl of ingredients are going to be our wet ingredients. So get some warm water, 1 cup of warm water into that bowl. Next, you want to get 1 organic egg into that water. So next you want to get 1/3 of a cup of dairy-free margarine. We use this Earth Balance stuff, okay, because it's soy-free. There's a lot of dairy-free butter products out there that use soy as the main ingredient, and soy and I are not friends. So that's why I use this stuff. It may not be the healthiest thing in the world to use, I admit that, but it tastes fantastic. All right, so transfer your 1/3 of a cup of dairy-free margarine into a microwave-safe bowl. You want to microwave it for around 30 seconds, not too long, otherwise, it's going to be so hot. And once it's melted, you're going to get that into your egg and water mixture and whisk it together so it doesn't cook the egg. So while that margarine is nuking away, get yourself some organic honey and add 2 tablespoons into the water mixture. All right, so you can see I've microwaved my margarine just enough so that it's completely melted, but no more than that. And I want to pour that into my water, honey, and egg mixture, and I use a small whisk to really combine it well. Whisk away. All right, so most of the work is done. Let's have a look at this yeast mixture, see what that's up to. So if you've ever proofed yeast before, guys, you're accustomed to seeing this sort of dome of foam on the top of your yeast mixture, okay? And underneath, of course, is the liquid. So we're going to add all of these ingredients together now and get our bread loaf going. All right, so let me take a second to talk about bread pans before we mix all these ingredients together. Everyone's got a bread pan, right? That's been in the family for generations, or you inherited it from grandma or whatever, and most of them will do the trick just fine. The thing that you need to watch out for, make sure that you're not using a bread pan that is too small for this quantity of dough. All right, the problem that you're going to have is if you get one of these 8.5 by 4.5 by 2.5, can you see that? All right, a lot of them have the size written on the side. That's too small. 8.5 by 4.5 by 2.5, not big enough to hold this quantity of dough. It's going to rise and it's going to bake right out of its shell, and it's going to end up in the bottom of your oven. Not a fun thing. So you want to make sure that your bread pan is 9-inch by 5-inch by 3-inch high. That is the exact right size bread pan to use for this recipe. It's just the right sort of volume so that it doesn't get a big air pocket in the middle, or, it's going to come out solid loaf of bread, nice and light and fluffy if you use the right size bread pan. Some people have, bread pans that are a lot wider, and you're tempted to let it rise a lot longer than 15-20 minutes. You let it go for 30 minutes to fill up your big pan. It's going to have a bubble of air in the middle and it's going to flop. That's the right size pan. Trust me, been doing it for years. All right, so before we mix all those ingredients together, get a little tiny bit of your dairy-free margarine and go ahead and grease the inside of your 9 by 5 by 3 bread pan. So it'll help it not stick, but it also help create a very nice little light golden crust around the edges of your bread. All right, so here's the trinity of ingredients, guys. The dry mixture, the wet mixture, and the yeast mixture. Let's combine them into the big bowl. All right, get everything into the dry mixture. Yeast. And I always like to give that wet mixture with the eggs and the honey another little whisk before adding it in, because the honey always drops in the bottom of the bowl. So whisk that together while you're pouring it in. Don't leave anything left in there. You can use an electric mixer if you've got one, and just go ahead and mix that together really well so that you will remove all of the lumps. I've just been doing it this way for a while. I start with a cake spatula, and that gives me a lumpy mixture, and now I switch out to the big whisk until I get it nice and smooth. But if you don't feel like you have the muscle power for it, electric mixer will do the trick in no time flat. So you've basically got yourself a very smooth, thick pancake batter, almost akin to a pancake batter. You're not going to be kneading this dough, that's for sure, okay? So let's have a quick look at the texture. You're going to say, Paul, I've added too much liquid. It's not, it's perfectly fine. That's the texture that you're looking for. It's very, very wet, okay? But trust me, this bread is going to rise up and cook up perfectly. All right, transfer that into your greased cake pan. All right, so once that dough's been transferred, just give it a little jiggle so that it flattens out the top. And you want to let this rise no higher than 1/8 of an inch just below the edge of the pan. You don't want it to rise above. That's very important, okay? Otherwise, you may have some issues. The time, depending on the temperature, it could be a really hot day or a cold day in winter, it can vary. So set a timer for 15 minutes, and if you see that it hasn't really gotten close to the edge of the pan, let it go for another 5. But after that, I would say 20 minutes is the max, all right? No more than that. So now is a good time to preheat your oven to 375 and just wait until the dough has risen. All right, so my 15-minute timer is up. Let's have a look where the bread has risen to. It's looking pretty good, guys. It hasn't quite gotten to that 1/8 of an inch away from the top rim, but you know what? I'm not going to wait any longer. 15 minutes is more than enough time. The only concern is if it's getting too high, too fast, depending on the weather and the altitude, and there's always so many factors. So 15 minutes is a safe time. Now, let's get this in the oven. Okay, so it's time to cook this bread at 375 in the center rack for 40 minutes. Don't check on it, just let her cook. See you in 40 minutes. All right, guys, 40 minutes is up. Let's get that loaf of bread out of the oven. Oh, beautiful, if I do say so myself. Look at that. Gorgeous loaf of gluten-free, dairy-free bread. All right, so the next thing you want to do is get that loaf out of the pan and flip it onto a cooling rack. Let's have a look. So that's our weekly ritual, guys. A fresh loaf of gluten-free, dairy-free white bread cooling on the rack. Just delicious, and the smell is something else. So as tempting as it may be to dive right into it, guys, you've got to let it cool for an hour. So walk away, come back when it's cooled up to room temperature. All right, so we baked this bread for 40 minutes. We let it cool on the counter for an hour. Now it's time to slice into it. Let's have a look before we tear it apart, though. Beautiful loaf of bread, the golden crust, and even on the bottom, nothing burnt, and inside, it's nice and firm, but spongy and light. Let's open it up. All right, so with the first slice off, let's have a look at this beautiful spongy interior. Look at that, it's absolutely soft and gorgeous. That's sandwich bread, if I do say so myself. Couple of slices. There you go. This is what you can expect with this recipe, guys. Some beautiful, soft and moist, delicious, gluten-free, dairy-free white bread. And it just pulls apart, and this toasts really well. If you want to have a nice peanut butter toast in the morning, that's the way to do it. This stuff is absolutely fantastic. It has no aftertaste, and I really hope you try this recipe out. If you want, you can store it just in a plastic bag like this for around a week, just on the countertop. Don't refrigerate it unless you have to, because as soon as you pop it into the fridge overnight, it gets firm, and then it's still delicious, but you're relegated to toasting it. You really do need to toast it after it's been in the fridge, because it loses that appeal. It loses that soft, moist texture than it has when it comes out of the oven. So there you go, guys. The reboot of the gluten-free, dairy-free bread is complete. So guys, thanks for watching this reboot of my bread recipe. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This is the first part of a monthly series where I'm going to be bringing you brand new gluten-free, dairy-free bread recipes, flatbreads, all kinds of, monkey bread, different things. I've got a bunch of ideas. All I have to do is pick the order, then I'm going to cook them for you and bring them to you on Saturdays once a month or so. So be sure to stay tuned to the channel and join me every Wednesday night, aka Wednesday, live right here from the Impulsive Culinarian kitchen, where I open up a brand new bottle of delicious wine and I share it with you every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. I'd love to see you. Catch you in the next video, guys.